Hi, and welcome to WordNerds. I'm Carrie DiRisio. I'm the author of BroodingYAHero's Guide to Achieving Main Character Status, and I'm also the creator of the viral Twitter account BroodingYAHero. And I'm so excited to be on the WordNerds blog today. I'll be talking to you about tropes in fiction, how to use them as tools to build your story, how not to use them, and how not all tropes are bad, but some of them are kind of harmful and you should probably never use them ever again. And before we dive too far into the trope discussions, I will talk to you a little bit about the BroodingYAHero book. I'm very excited to be a debut author this year. It's been a really thrilling process, and I think it's going to be a great book. So a little bit about BroodingYAHero's Guide to Achieving Main Character Status. It's both an advice book with activities and quizzes and all of those fun things you've probably done in like Cosmo or 17 magazine, where you circles A and B and you find out where your ideal date is. Except with Broody, your ideal date is you're probably saving the world, or at least saving prom. And then it also has a narrative component where Broody himself is the main character of this interesting story where he's actually, discovering what it really means to be a main character, and maybe it isn't what he thought it was. So it's this fun meta adventure into the idea of character tropes and things we take for granted as main character things that they have to do. I mean, when's the last time you read a book where the YA protagonist wasn't a reader herself? They're always, bookish assassins and bookish book people and bookish writers. And it's just kind of fun to look at those tropes and decide, are these good tropes? Are these bad tropes? Are these just overdone tropes that we could use a little bit of a break from? I also want to thank you for bearing with me, as this is my first ever vlog, and I'm realizing as I'm talking to myself that I have the weirdest, most expressive eyelids known to mankind, and I do apologize for my eyelids. Please do not title this video, "I apologize for my eyelids." That will be the name of my punk rock album. Anyways, so now we can dive into the discussion of tropes as tools in your writing, what to use them for and what to avoid, and how you can twist them to make a better story. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is that tropes are not inherently bad. I have so many people who come up to me and they say, "Oh, Carrie, you're BroodingYAHero. I can't ever recommend this book to you because it's got this brooding boyfriend in a rock band." I was like, no, give me that book. It's probably going to be one of my top 10 favorite books. Because I only mock what I love, and I do love the brooding guy characters. I think they're great. One of my favorites, I'm not going to actually name my favorites because I'm always worried my favorite authors will hate BroodingYAHero and then I'll get in trouble for liking their broodies. But it's not bad to use tropes. And it's almost impossible to come up with a story if you don't use any tropes at all. You need them. You need them to build romantic tension if they get into a room and they have to share a bed, or you need them to use to build dramatic tension because everything's going wrong for this character and they just can't get a lucky break. That's a trope, maybe. Really, anything you break it down to can be a trope. You can waste hours of your life on tvtropes.com just looking at how many different themes and elements and characters can be found across every form of media, from kids' picture books up to opera. You'll have the lovable rogue is a great character type that he's always around. It's just a natural part of storytelling to rely on these building blocks that the audience will see and be able to understand, like a shorthand for the rest of the story. Now, we've explained that tropes aren't bad to use, but I think it's important to recognize that you can't just build a book on tropes and have it be groundbreaking and original. Harry Potter is kind of everyone's go-to explanation of story because we've all read the books. And Harry Potter works because it's an interesting set of tropes from kind of the boarding school, kid goes off to a boarding school and meets his best friends, and also kid is the chosen one to save the end of the world. Like, it's combining tropes from two different things, and I think it works out really well. in that case because it's a juxtaposition of two different sets of tropes. Another book that does tropes that I'm just going to pull up is A Shadow Bright and Burning. This is one of my favorite reads last year, and I love, without spoilers, I can't tell you too much, but I really love how the author isn't afraid to use some tropes. I mean, there's handsome Victorian men in waistcoats, and that's a lovely trope, and you can't go wrong with it. But she also twists some of the fun tropes about chosen ones, about things like that, to make it a new and unusual story without getting rid of everything and trying to write this new weird story that has absolutely no tropes. It's not, you can't write a book by ignoring every single trope in the world. I've tried, it didn't work out well. So to build a book with tropes, I would suggest you research and dig into the tropes that make your heart sing. What story building blocks get you excited every time you pick up a new book? Maybe you love Friends to Lovers and you just adore watching that slow burn romance happen. It's not my cup of tea, as I think everyone on the internet knows, but lots of people love it. And if that's a trope that gets your engines going, think about unusual elements you could put in with that. Maybe it's an unusual setting, or maybe it's, different characters, and you're pulling characters from your own life experience and really owning your life story and bringing in fun and exciting elements that only you can bring into that story. Or maybe it's that you really absolutely hate a trope, and what you can do then is call a deconstruction, and you can tear apart a trope and say, you know what, I don't think this trope would ever work out in real life. I'm going to build a story that kind of pulls the curtain off from the trope. And those stories are really fun too. And I'm always, be careful not to be malicious about it, don't go out there and say, I am absolutely disgusted with the idea that no one can ever recognize a superhero's secret identity. That's the stupidest trope ever. I hate all of it. Like, do it with respect and consideration as you're kind of building and detailing the story, and you'll have a really great story from it. So that's deconstruction, is tearing down a trope and kind of revealing why it doesn't work. Or you can take a trope you love and add on or twist it or put it in an unusual new setting that maybe it hasn't been done before. I think another example of a book that plays with tropes is Ellen Kushner's Swords Point, because you have this awesome badass swordsman who has a scholarly boyfriend, and from the beginning of the story you get the sense that this is going to be a fun, thrilling fantasy set in one city, but because her characters are so real and three-dimensional and everything, the tropes they're not noticeable and glaring. It's this beautifully crafted world that maybe if you dig really deep down you can find the tropes in it, but the tropes just make the story stronger. They're the skeleton that holds up all of your detail and your setting and your plot. We've all read books, and I'm not going to name names, where it's just a 20 trope pileup. It's chosen one meets end of the world meets dystopian engineered by the government meets elephants that fly. That's not even a trope, but I realize I might sound like I'm describing one book, and I'm really trying not to. I'm just trying to talk about the stories we've read that you're like, wow, that's just 8 bestsellers put in a blender and you're trying to make something new out of it. I don't think those books work, in part because I don't know if they're coming from a place of like love and interest in the trope. And I think some of the best books come from you engaging and you working with the trope. That's where you can shine as a writer, if you either take the challenge of deconstructing or the challenge of using a trope as a skeleton. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about harmful tropes. Broody does tweet about those sometimes, and even in the book, I mean, you have to admit there are some tropes out there that are really kind of problematic. There's a difference between like the hot broody boyfriend and the guy who should probably be locked up for sexual harassment. Like, I do think it's important to realize that just because a story trope exists in so many other books does not make it a good trope. I think an immediate example that comes to mind is the white savior trope in a fantasy novel, and that's when you have a race or an island or a country full of people of color, and then you have a main character who's from a white, usually British-inspired civilization, and they come to this world and they're like, hi, I'm going to save you because colonialism. and that trope is really bad, and just stay away from things like that, you know, especially if the trope relates to any marginalization of people, any sort of unequal power tropes, gender-based tropes, sexuality-based tropes. All of those can be really problematic really quickly. If you want to use one, make sure you commit to researching it, getting your sensitivity readers. And you know, sometimes you can't even use the trope. It's just, if enough people have spoken out and said, this is a really problematic thing to do, don't do it. Like, there are so many other stories to tell that you don't need to write a story that accidentally espouses that, you know, rape culture is awesome, because we don't need any of those stories, you know? So stay away from problematic tropes. Think carefully. Don't just rely on, oh, this must be romantic because I've seen it in other books, or, well, I saw a movie once and they had this plot, so it must be okay. That's usually not the case. Try and read, especially if you're writing fantasy or historical fiction, try and read actual books and piece together where the problematic trope comes into play. We, as obviously I'm speaking English, so I'm kind of talking about English storytelling tradition. And I do have to apologize, I am not an English major, so half the time I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I think sometimes we don't realize how many of our tropes and how many of our storytelling things are deeply rooted in colonialism, in, you know, a problematic past that we haven't always come to terms with. I mean, if you read some of the stuff that, like, is classics now, a lot of it is really awful and sexist and horrible, and yet we still carry those tropes with us, and we have to be sure that we're not just reaching for the nearest trope and using it just because that's what some old dead rich white dude did in 1902. Like, don't do that. All right, so we wrapped up a kind of depressing talk about what tropes you shouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and how just because old dead guys did it in 1900 does not mean you should do it. Also, not a good name to title this blog. Great idea for my next punk rock album. Old dead guys did it, so I can too. So I want to recommend another book. I promised myself going on here that I was going to recommend some books, and then I realized I had packed most of my books, so I couldn't hold up pretty pictures of books and show them to you. Hopefully maybe I can, like, I'll comment on this and give you some more book recommendations. And I do have one other book I wanted to highlight, and that's The Girl from Everywhere. This is another amazing book because, like we said, tropes aren't bad. Tropes do exist in this book in the sense that there's, you know, again, I am always careful with tropes because sometimes you get spoilers for the story. But one of the things I loved about The Girl from Everywhere is you can tell the author really felt passionate about what she was writing about and really owned her research and loved her characters and committed to a genuine story. And I think that's where you run into amazing writing. And that's when tropes aren't problems, are when you've crafted a beautiful being around that skeleton that you've made from tropes. And if you craft your stories well, then you never actually see the tropes, and it's only, you know, days or weeks later that you're talking to your friends. You're like, oh, hey, I remember that book that actually did have X, Y, or Z trope, and I didn't even see it. So I love when books do that, and when they're, you know, well written and lush in details, and they can have tropes that don't bother you, and you might not even catch them. So that sums up everything on this discussion about tropes today. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear about your favorite tropes, about books that you think did really well with playing with tropes. Don't tell me what your least favorite trope-filled book was, because I guarantee someone else will say it's not the most trope-filled book out there. This is not the Olympics. I will not hand out gold medals to the most trope-filled book. The actual winner of that book is a book I wrote when I was like 7, and I just took Chronicles of Narnia and put myself in it, and then added every single trope I could think of to myself. That one might actually win the Trope Pile-Up Award. That's all from me, and thank you again to WordNerds for hosting me. I hope you get out Brooding YA Heroes Guide to Achieving Main Character Status in October when it hits shelves.